Welcome to the autumn meeting of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Earth Resources. We have an engaging and thought-provoking meeting planned for today. My name is Jim Slutz and I serve as chair of the committee. The committee, let me start with a little background. I know most of you know who the committee is, but let's just cover that briefly. The Committee on Earth Resources is a standing committee of the Board on Earth Science and Resources, and serves the community by monitoring and engaging on issues relevant to energy and non-fuel mineral resources. The committee examines issues related to the availability, supply, delivery, and impacts of energy and mineral resources. The health and safety of workforce engaged in resource exploration and production, and the management and stewardship of lands on which they are located. The committee serves stakeholders with objective, evidence-based, scientific, and engineering information to support decision and policy making. Committee members serve as volunteers, which is an important element of our service. Before we get underway, we'll quickly introduce the committee. I'm going to ask the members to give their name and affiliation. We have an exciting program, so we will dispense with extended introductions. Again, I'm Jim Slutz. I work for the National Petroleum Council, which is a federal advisory committee. Committee members, I'm just going to call out your first name, and if you would just introduce again your name and affiliation, that way folks will have an opportunity to have a name with and voice with your name and picture. Anyway, Carmen, are you online?
Hi, I'm Carmen Agaritas. I'm an Associate Dean for Instruction in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment at the University of Kentucky.
Bridget?
Hi, I'm Bridget Ailing. I'm an Associate Professor at the Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology at the University of Nevada, Reno, and the Director of the Great Basin Center for Geothermal Energy at the university.
Daniel?
Hi, I'm Dan Connell, Senior Vice President of Strategy with Consol Energy in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
We have two Johns, so I'll have to dispense. John Leftwich. Okay, well, if John joins, we'll come back to him. John Marsden?
Hi, my name's John Marsden. I'm a consultant with Metallurgium, consulting to the copper and gold hard rock mining industry.
Okay, thanks. Joel?
Excuse me, Joel Renner, retired from the Idaho National Laboratory.
David?
I am David Spears. I am the state geologist of Virginia.
And Deborah Peacock is not available today as one of our committee members. Let me just give John Leftwich a chance. John joined us.
Jim, he is on, but I think he might be muted on his phone.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so for next is, let me just move on here and give you a little background on the development of this annual meeting, or this autumn meeting. Over the past year, the committee has been exploring aspects of an energy transition within our Earth Resources mission. A fundamental premise that has evolved is that all future energy scenarios will require Earth resources. These Earth resource needs are likely to have greater breadth in science and technology than past demands. This will include, for example, technologies for carbon storage, expanded opportunities for geothermal energy, and ever-increasing demands for earth minerals to support greater automation and electrification of the energy system. The committee anticipates continuing our task of bringing insight to the earth resources components of an energy transition in 2021. And hopefully we'll actually get to meet in person at some point later in the year. The committee, one of the issues the committee identified was that the evolving workforce needed to support Earth resources for the energy transition is an important topic. The Earth resource community has expressed concerns about developing a new talent for the coming decades, in part because new generations of potential scientists and engineers are not necessarily seeing the critical role of Earth resources for our future energy needs. Furthermore, this is in an environment where the earth resources, sciences, and technical community is less diverse than other STEM fields. There is data to show that the earth resource STEM fields have made limited progress in diversity over the past few decades. The earth resource community can only be successful if we can encourage and develop a workforce that reflects society as a whole, and one that is not only diverse, but also establishes environments that are just, equitable, and inclusive. It was with this principle in mind that the committee organized this meeting, which we've titled Pathways Toward the Future, Just, Equitable, Diverse, and Inclusive Energy Workforce, sometimes called a J.E.D.I. This meeting is planned as a launching point for continuing to work on this issue. We will look for your ideas and input during today's discussions, fully recognizing that in 2 or 3 hours we can't solve things, but we hopefully can build a foundation. And as in all committee meetings, those participating will offer as many unique and insightful thoughts as our speakers and members. We look forward to a meeting that will move us forward and lay a foundation for future action among the people assembled here today. As collaborations or other efforts among federal and state agencies, industry, academia, professional nonprofit organization, and students, and as future activities for this committee that could leverage the capabilities of the national academies in different ways. We hope that we can look back on such a body of work in the coming years and determine that we have truly moved toward a J.E.D.I-enabled energy workforce. Before we get started, I'll mention a couple housekeeping items. Erica, could you share the agenda slide, please?
I don't think he has an agenda slide. I don't think he has an agenda slide, Jim, so we might need to just talk through that.
Okay, so today's agenda, we'll have a keynote kickoff speaker, and I'll introduce our speaker in a moment, and we will have an opportunity for discussion and Q&A at the end of that presentation. Then we'll move into a very exciting panel discussion where each of the panels will give a very brief flash talk followed by a very robust discussion. And we do have a 3-hour meeting today, so rest assured we'll give all of you an opportunity for a break in there. But we will look forward to everyone's input and participation in this discussion. Eric, do you have the slide on participation? And remarks. And Sherilyn and I will be pulling as many of your questions as we can from the collected list in our respective parts of the agenda. We'll also be hosting questions from our committee members. We know we can't get to every question, but we'll certainly do our best in the available time. So to get us started now, let me just proceed with the introduction for Dr. Stephen Wells from the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. Stephen Wells serves as the 17th president of New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, a Hispanic serving STEM university. As president and chief executive officer, Dr. Wells oversees a university with 2,000 students that includes undergraduates and graduates, and 800 faculty and staff, providing leadership in the execution of the university's strategic plan. He provides continuous dialogue between students, faculty, and administration in the changing climate of higher education, especially with respect to societal developments and topics. Stephen earned his master's and PhD both in geology from the University of Cincinnati and he has received numerous honors for his research. And with that, brief introduction. Let me turn turn this over to Stephen to really get us kicked off.
Thank you very much, Jim and committee members, for this opportunity to address such an important topic. And it's a real honor, and I appreciate this. I think for the purpose, we'll just jump right into the slides, Eric, if we can do that. Again, Elizabeth, Eric, and committee members, thank you for this opportunity. What I want to do is give you just a brief background on our university. And then we'll move into some of the pathways, mainly three major pathways we've taken. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This next slide shows our mission. And it's interesting because the university formed about 130 years ago, prior to New Mexico being a state. It was still a territory. Was founded by 4 Hispanic owners and 3 Anglo. So diversity has been in our blood. They donated the land to create the university when it was deemed that we needed a school of mining at that time. And so that diversity and the creation of the campus has been in the DNA from the very beginning. And you'll see in terms of our mission, we are there to educate a diverse student body. And I'll talk a bit about our diversity in a minute. Preparing our scientists and engineers for the future and all types of aspects of engineering and science, but we'll focus a little bit on the earth sciences and natural resources and energy components today. You'll also see that in this mission statement, even though our students probably can't recite this, if you said, what's the mission of the university, they would know that at the core of our efforts is to advance STEM for the benefit of humanity. And when you talk to the students, that is really an important part of why they come to New Mexico Tech. So, and then I'll address the STEM to the E squared in a bit later on. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, and so part of the quest was, what's our vision? And interestingly enough, in 2017, we decided to build a decadal vision, put together a leadership committee that consisted not only of faculty and staff, but students of diversity. And they helped craft this global statement, as well as the major goals for our campus over the decade. And clearly you can see promoting a diverse culture is very important, and building respect among all of us to set a stage for when they go on into their profession. Also leveraging our reputation to enhance undergraduate teaching and research, as well as ultimately becoming a doctoral degree institution. And this is all core for building this advanced workforce, as you'll see as we go later on. So let's move to the next slide. I'm going to try to be aware of my 20 minutes here. This is a snapshot of our campus, a small campus shown there in the picture in green, but our campus is actually incredibly extensive because of our large energetics testing facility that is in the distance there around the end mountain. Our sponsored research activity, and I'll come back to the significance of this, ranges anywhere from 60, 72 to this year we were looking at 144 million. And we receive approximately 27 million to 28 million in state appropriation. So we're 2 or 3 to 1 ratio of sponsored to state support. And that's going to play out in terms of how we support our students that I'll talk about here in a minute. Our undergraduate demographics, about 53% Anglo, 32% Hispanic, 5% Native American and Indigenous, and about just shy of 2% African American. What's really significant about our institution is we have multiple research centers that are not directly part of the academic aspect, but contribute through the research endeavors that they do. We have 2 statutorily created agencies, the Bureau of Geology and the Petroleum Recovery Research Center, plus 10 scientific and engineering centers, as well as testing institutions on our campus. The significance of this is it allows our students to have opportunities for research from day one when they walk into campus. One freshman that came in his second semester was writing a report to Northrop Grumman and said, I can't believe it. I'm a freshman and they're asking me to draft a report to Northrop Grumman, because that's what we do. We immerse them, and we'll carry that theme through as an important thing, I think, for underrepresented students and their success. So in terms of measuring our success, the next slide will show you the rankings that the National Science Foundation does on universities that produce students. It's the percent of students that go on to get a PhD, both public and private. The blue is public, the black is private. We're in the top 15 in the nation for students that go on to get a PhD. And I think the significance is that we build into their DNA from the get-go that to do research, to follow a pursuit of knowledge and advancement of that knowledge. So this is, we think, a pretty good metric of measurement for how successful we are in building capabilities for students to advance science and engineering. Next slide, please. So let's jump in. One of the questions is, what are we doing in terms of supporting our underrepresented students, the Black, Indigenous, people of color populations? As I mentioned earlier, I really believe that one of the most important things is the hands-on experiential opportunities for our research from our freshmen forward. And that carries on through their senior year, through engineering, design, and so forth. And from our research centers, we provide almost $4 million in student support to help them. And this is important because that connects them immediately to a family on campus. Many of these students come from areas that are rural, strong family support. This builds that immediately by having them work as partners on research projects. Another step that we've taken is peer-to-peer mentoring. Juniors and seniors mentor freshmen and sophomores. Closer of age, easy for them to communicate, talk about their challenges that face them. And we'll talk about that transition to the workforce at the end. The other thing is we feel very committed to raising donations and building philanthropic giving to support our students. We've received 2 endowments from the Star Foundation in Manhattan, one that supports essentially any Native American student that wants to come to Tech, as well as we're building one now for Native American professorship, because students need to see people that look like them on this campus. We've developed a committee. That committee not only consists of a vast number of students, faculty, and staff, but also our community, since we have a diverse community. And we're going to acquire a house next to campus that allows the students a place to be and interact. This seemed to be very important to this group of students who said they need a place to come together. So, next one. And other things that we're doing here is we've reorganized the institution to focus on student life and its support systems. That's the quality of life they might have, mental health challenges. Many of our students are very bright, a little bit on the spectrum, and so we have to be very attentive to that. During COVID, we've developed fireside chats where the administration, faculty, and students meet 1 to 2 times a week for just a discussion. And there's no topics, it's just what's on your mind. And this seems to be a great support for these students. And allowing our students to take leadership roles, we have an African-American student who came from Albuquerque. He's a great leader. He's taken leadership in e-gaming sports. We don't have NCAA athletics at our campus, but he's built this into something that's very exciting. And in fact, he's such a leader that we've just added him as our first student on our foundation. Leveraging alumni network in the industry is in support of internships and critical, both nationally and globally. And then a strong career services center is just absolutely fundamental. And I'm not going to go through the details there, but building your skill sets, such as how to have a dinner, a business dinner. And we do that every year. Next. Okay, and so what's again the metrics? How are we doing in terms of our training and success? Our graduation rate is the highest we've had for 4 years. That may seem low, and it's a bit low nationally, but we have improved it significantly. Our retention rate from freshman to sophomore is the highest it's ever been, 81%. And our persistence rate beyond, where people go on third year and beyond, is 68%. And really, most importantly, 80% of our students have job offers in hands at graduation. And so we think those are all indicators of the success that our programs have on campus. Next. So let's talk about the pathways to meet the talent needs for the future. And this is the first one. One is the triple threat graduate. I'm borrowing this from Forbes that described the triple threat like you have in basketball to what makes graduates from college successful. And they say they're triple threat graduates if they have hands-on long-term projects, participation, they experience academically linked internships, and they obtained industry recognized credentials. Well, we believe we do that. We have had those as key elements to our students, our undergraduates, as well as our graduates. And you can see some of the top companies that provide internships and then ultimately employment to our students. And having those internships is really, really fundamental. And this year has been a challenge because many of the companies, because of COVID, canceled internships. And as a consequence, we've seen our graduate program grow significantly as students decided to go into graduate school instead of taking an internship. Next. So again, I'm going to say that for us and our success, having hands-on experience from freshman year forward is critical. And in particular at our university, we have a great ratio of students to faculty, 12, 14 to 1. And that allows the students to have direct contact and build relationships with faculty essentially from their freshman year on. And so that is part of our formula for the triple threat. Next. So again, part of that triple threat should yield a high return on investment. Sometimes people don't like to hear that, but if you're investing in your education, you want to make sure it's worth it. And Forbes ranked New Mexico Tech number 56 in terms of the best education for your tuition, as well as CNBC. And we think that's another metric that shows that we're on the right path for providing our students with a quality of education that allows them to go on into the workforce and be successful. Next. So let's take a look now at the extractive industries, in particular, petroleum, oil, and gas. And the significance is that this is one of our centers that does work for the state. It was created as an entity for the state to enable increased oil and gas production. But what they do is they bring a lot of our students in from our petroleum engineering department, our earth sciences, and provide support to them on real life opportunities in oil and gas. And that's been going on now for 30 years. And so their link, both in terms of sharing their staff and their money for our students, is fundamental. And you can see in that plot the variations in student support and student count over the years. And we went down from a high in the like FY 13 through 15, and we're growing that back again now. And some of the companies that hire students include Freeport McMoran, Halliburton, Chevron, Conoco, Newborn Oil. So that gives you an idea of the support we provide our students in this area. But there's a change going on, and the next slide will show that change, in that we are, in today's world, there is more than an economic impact described to the industry. and that this center was initially designed to serve. And it's on growing interest and support for handling detrimental waste products that are generated by these industries. And this has great student interest as well. And that includes things like produced water and CO2 and other emissions that might attribute to the climate change and have other negative impacts. And so if you take a look at that graph, you can see 10 years ago, 2/3 of the students funded by this center were studying traditional topics. But now that's changed, and now at least 70% are studying geologic storage of carbon dioxide and working on projects related to that. And as that shift is occurring, we're seeing now the hole being filled by international students who want to come and be trained more in the traditional types of studies and projects that we've had at the PRRC. So there's a real change now in student interest of our students here in New Mexico and what's happening internationally. Next, please. And part of that change is beginning with leveraging the technology we develop in the extractive industry for other types of use that are more humanitarian in nature and can be considered that. We have developed a new technology for water purification through hollow fiber membranes for produced water. And this has been tested in 2 or 3 places in the state. We're working with Oxy and a few other companies, Chevron, on deploying this. But it was interesting that we got a call from one of our leading state senators, Senator Linda Lopez, who said, can you use this to help the Native Americans and the tribal lands, because they're suffering greatly from water resources, and now under COVID even more so. So we started looking at turning this technology into something that could help humanity. And the next slide shows we started this by forming a collaborative with Navajo Technical University, first time we'd ever done that, where we would do things together in developing and building the technology with an industry, PESCO, that's usually built equipment for oil and gas, but now we're building this water purification system with us. And then training through the Bureau of Geology for groundwater sampling and analysis. And so this now builds a workforce, not only for water resources, but for students to have a greater appreciation of what technology in the extractive industries can bring to a broader perspective. Next slide, please. We also have a growing interest with our underrepresented students in renewable energy projects, and especially those that have a slight twist to them. In many of these cases by our Professor Haselian, looks at bio-inspired types of projects that you might gain from looking at how penguins arrange themselves to maximize solar radiation, and the way you might arrange solar panels, to using updrafts around solar fields to man drones for monitoring the area. So this is this type of energy projects have really attracted several of our, in particular our Hispanic students, to jump into this. And then the next slide is just a continuation of that. This case, this is using native vegetation to enhance the efficiency and putting those into nanocrystalline solar cells to increase the efficiency of those solar cells. And the plot shows that the combination from prickly pear, opuntia, and from the mulberry increases the efficiency of these solar panels. And Kenneth is an African-American student who's working with us on this project. So again, a very strong interest in the renewable energy by our underrepresented students here. Next slide. So the other pathway, and this is one I helped to create here and build on, is transforming the university into an entrepreneurship university. Our goal is not to make every student an entrepreneur, but provide a rich environment where students can take the opportunity to maybe take their idea to potentially commercialization. And so we have built what we called a STEM E² university. It's exponent of entrepreneurialism, engineering and entrepreneurialism, to help build our campus and give our students an extra potential opportunity that gives them an edge when they go into the workforce. And the next slide will show you a couple of the ways that we've done that. Every year we've had an inventors and entrepreneurs workshop. This year we had to cancel it. We did do part of it virtually, where we bring in inventors, investors, entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley to Manhattan to help our faculty, students, and staff learn how to take an idea to commercialization. One of the most exciting things is that in 2017, one of our students who had an idea and built the technology that extends the normal batteries you throw away when your flashlight gets dim, he found out a way of extending that life by 30%. Investors came up to him and they created a company called Battery Savers. So he's getting his PhD at Texas Tech and is also the CEO of Battery Savers. And then we've turned this year's virtual Wolves Den. This is like a Shark's Tank where students compete with their best ideas that might be commercialized. And interestingly, we opened it to two-year colleges and to high schools. And in first place was a Navajo high school, Tehachapi High School, and they won first place this year, which is a real coup for them. And different for Native Americans that tend not to be very proactive and aggressive in presenting ideas, but they took first place. And again, industry sponsorship is fundamental. We get that from the national labs, in this case, the Air Force Research Lab and Los Alamos National Lab. Next, please. So the third pathway is outreach. And this pathway, I think we do in spades. The Bureau of Geology at Tech has just done a great job of reaching out. And they do this through Tech Trek, the AAUW's program to take young women and train them and build their passion in STEM. We've done this for 2 years with industry and national lab support. You see there on the one side, 44% of the students were Hispanic, 3% Black, and 16% indigenous. So, and I love the quote from the one student, I always had been worried about going into a male-dominated field. Well, this breaks those barriers and allows them to see a pathway forward for their career in science and engineering. Next. And part of this outreach is also to train the teachers. And we do that through a program called Rocking Around New Mexico, we've done for 25 years, where 30 to 40 K through 12 teachers are trained in the field in terms of earth sciences and how to enhance their ability to educate and inspire the students. And the significance of this is that these faculty go out and they reach many Black, Indigenous people of color teachers and students. It's a triple-fold, quadruple-fold type of impact that we have through this. And we also have a Master's of Science teaching program that focuses on bringing underrepresented teachers in to train them on improving their skill sets in science education at the same time as they get their Masters. So those are another way. So triple threat, entrepreneurship, and outreach are the three pathways that we have built on our campus. And next slide. So I was asked to also talk about the challenges and obstacles in transitioning to the workforce. And these are actually summaries directly from our students, our interviews. They include separation from family and support structure, and that's why I talked about the role of getting students involved in research from the very beginning to build a family-like network and having the peer-to-peer mentoring. But interestingly, students feel like, they say they feel like an imposter because no one looks at them like them when they go into the workforce, which is a challenge that they see. And they also feel that there's a lack of feedback. Students are used to getting feedback from faculty and colleagues almost on an hourly basis. And you don't normally get that when you're in the working world until maybe you screw something up. And so that they see as a challenge and trying to understand if they're doing the right things. Interestingly, they said understanding benefit packages when they go into the workforce was a challenge for them as well. And finally, understanding that deadlines aren't set for them. They have to create their own deadlines, their own time schedule, and work things out. And that's something I think our university can do a better job at training on that last one, that one that's come up in our radar scope on how we might improve those skill sets. So this gives an overview of those kinds of challenges. There are many more, but these were the top 5 that we have from our student interviews. And with that, I know my time's pressing here, so let me go and just acknowledge all the individuals who helped me. And the next slide, Eric, shows all those people who helped me in collecting the information for this presentation. And I want to thank all of you very much for listening. And I think the next slide is just questions. So Jim, with that, I'm going to turn it back to you and thank you for this opportunity. I don't know how I did on my time. Hopefully it was okay.
Oh, you're perfect. You're perfect on time. We still have time for discussion, and I will invite folks to a couple different options. If you're on the committee or a panelist, then you have the opportunity to raise your hand. For those that are just on as participants, if you would enter your question in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to as much as we can. And I'll kick off with a couple, Stephen. So we won't let you off the hook while folks are figuring out what to
no problem.
What to ask. And I was a bit intrigued by one of the things that I found very interesting was some of the movement of students, the more low domestic students focusing on some of the but largely are some of the technology areas that this committee's looking at, like carbon capture and sequestration and some of the and other things like critical minerals and things like that are very much needed for this, things that are focused on energy transition, changes in the energy mix. And what I was kind of curious, because so many of us are trying to, and I've spent some time in government, and you're usually playing catch up. Things have changed before you can actually adapt, and and we're dealing and so it was very, very interesting to see the evolution process of how the university is able to see those things out there and do that adaptation. Because obviously you don't want to be too far ahead of the curve, but you also need to be changing to meet those needs of your students and what not only what they want, but what the job market has available.
Jim, you're absolutely right. And this is always a challenge for any university or college, is how to see what that workforce is going to look like. And fortunately, I think because we have these centers and they're mainly soft money, they have to stay alive. So they're always looking down the road of where things are going. And because of that, they saw opportunities nationally for some of the large programs in carbon sequestration, as well as the produced water and the technology they've developed. So for us, having these research centers that drive a lot of forward thinking integrated into our campus, I think, and hiring our students is a real synergistic process that allows our students to say, wow, this is exciting, I want to be part of that. As soon as we signed that agreement with Navajo Technical University about produced water, we got a flood of students, and many of them underrepresented, saying, I want to be part of that. And so I think, again, because of that, our mission that we want to serve humanity, that they don't necessarily know that as one of our missions, but they feel it and they want to participate in that. And what's exciting for me is saying, look, you wouldn't have had this technology if it had not been for the extractive industry and what we're trying to do in that. And so keep that in mind as well. But you're right, looking ahead is very important. I think our centers help us do that.
That is an interesting important perspective. Let me ask you this: New Mexico Tech is a relatively small student population. Just to share, Mike, I'm a couple degrees from the Ohio State University, and we have had about 50,000 on campus. Right. But it's a relatively small population. How would you scale up some of the successes in developing a skilled and J.E.D.I enabled student population for a larger institution?
Well, I think that those those opportunities exist as clusters in campuses. And I know many of the universities have the Bureau of Geology sitting right there beside them and or on their campus. I went to undergraduate at Indiana University, and it was, I think it's those kinds of partnerships of looking at what they can do and what they're great in and what, say, a Department of Earth Sciences or Petroleum Engineering might do collaboratively. And so for us, it's a whole campus because we are small. But I think taking those clusters within a university and building that is an appropriate way. And I would reach out to even those departments that you might not think about that have opportunities to bring in diverse student populations. When I was at New Mexico and taught there, I brought in art students into earth sciences, and because of the way they thought and the way they saw the earth. And so I think the more you mix that interdisciplinary components, the more you might get some real creative opportunities. But scaling up through clustering in large universities probably is the most effective way that I would recommend. I've been to the large university, Cincinnati and Indiana. It's totally different. I agree. So
Well, I like that idea of that interdisciplinary approach. I think there's been a lot of examples of success of bringing in new ideas if you bring in people that aren't the same thought process. We have a couple questions coming in from our participants, and one is asking whether you can share some of the publications or areas where folks might access some information on these freshman research projects and how that system works.
Sure, I can. We can. Well, the best thing to do is go to our website. You can start there. But what I can do is maybe pull some things together and provide that to Elizabeth to provide to your committee. Let me do that. We used to start. We had a program, and we still continue to some degree, called student learning and living centers, and we get a cluster of 20 to 30 students to work on a research project. I think that had great possibilities. It depends upon the student body. Some students really aren't interested in it, but it builds a family, a community, and they pick their project. Interestingly, when you look at those, most of those are environmental related. The students that create these projects, and a lot of them are in the earth sciences. So let me see if I can pull some things together to show you what we've done in that area from our Office of Student Learning. I'd be happy to do that.
Another person's asking if you kind of you have obviously a lot of earth sciences graduates, or do you kind of keep statistics on to what extent the students stay with their career path in their education, and those that graduate in earth sciences stay with it. You may have other, related disciplines where you kind of track that. And we all know people kind of veer in different directions for a lot of different reasons.
We probably don't do the best job as we should as a university, but we are changing that. We have, for the past 4 years, built a young alumni association to bring people in as soon as they graduate and build that alumni connectivity. I think we'll have much better statistics after that, because once they become an alum immediately after graduating, then we keep track of what they do. And because we've been really growing our alumni base, we're setting forward on a comprehensive campaign. We are really reaching out to a lot of our alumni, and we've learned their trajectories of their lives. Many people go on to become executives or build their own businesses. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to put this pathway of entrepreneurialism, because we see many of our students not necessarily sticking with the field, but suddenly becoming the CEO, in this one case, of waste management. And so, or the vice president of Microsoft and developing Xbox. Those are the kinds of things that trajectories that they take. And so we don't probably have the best numbers on those, and that's something we need to improve. And I think our Young Alumni Association will help us in that process.
Thanks, Stephen. Stephen, I'm gonna ask you two questions at once here, because and give you a chance to kind of, and we'll use this as our kind of speed round wrap up. Okay.
Okay.
And So we had a question on you had mentioned this issue of students in your slide deck feeling like an imposter because they're not seeing people in there, and kind of efforts that you're doing kind of to help students or address that. And the other one is that are you finding this alternative energy and climate as a better hook or of greater interest to minority students than say the traditional exploration field that some may be seen as declining?
To the first one, yes. What we tried to do during Career Day is bring back our alumni that represent underrepresented populations, BIPOC populations, so the students can see them during the career fairs. And I think this is one way we've tried to address that imposter, letting them know that they're out there. They may not see them initially when they go to work, but they have people that look like them in those jobs, and many of them are quite successful. So I think the career fair and bringing people back is one way. The second question was, I want to collect data on that. I'm beginning to see that trend where there's a movement towards these types of environmental or humanitarian, and I think that's something that we've just noticed over the past couple of years, and so we'll have some better statistics on that. But what I have seen is that we get a lot of students now in the traditional fields of oil and gas and mineral exploration from overseas. That seems to be something that is a real clear trend for us. And many of these people try to stay in the US. Many of them, we have several students who came from Ghana, for example, that work for Freeport-McMoRan. And so that is a clear trend. In terms of the growing interest for underrepresented students in the environmental or the applied areas of that, we need to collect some more data.
Stephen, I'm going to make one comment because I think it's often overlooked but important foreign policy success of the United States that we train foreign students in sciences and earth resources, and I think that is important for the country.
It is.
Stephen, thank you so much for opening our program. I understand you're going to, just for anyone that may think of some questions for Stephen, Stephen's going to come back on and stay on for our panel discussion. So we'll all join me in our virtual applause and thank you to Steve for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, committee.
And now we'll turn the program over to our very capable moderator of the panel. Let me do a brief introduction for Sherilyn Williams-Stroud. Sherilyn is a research scientist, structural geologist at the Illinois State Geological Survey at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and president of Confractius Incorporated, which she formed to do specialized structural geology consulting in the oil and gas sector. She has had an illustrious career, and instead of going through it, let me just name a few of the organizations. She's been in senior roles with the U.S. Geological Survey. She's been in senior roles with Chevron Technical Exploration and Production Technology, Mid-Valley Exploration, Microseismic Incorporated, and Occidental Oil and Gas. Dr. Williams-Stroud received her BA in geology from Oberlin College, another Ohio school, and her MA and PhD in structural geology, both from Johns Hopkins University. Sherilyn, thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. Now, I don't have to do it. So it is my pleasure today to introduce this diverse panel of experts and professionals and students that are representing multiple energy sectors and also multiple sectors of the economy. So we have people from the private sector, from academia, and from government. And the items that we want the panelists to discuss today include things like workplace environment and J.E.D.I culture. So we want to talk about what the significant barriers are to achieving a J.E.D.I workforce, what factors are continuing to impact underrepresentation of some groups, and we want to have a idea or get an idea of what people think are programs that are effective at addressing underrepresentation in J.E.D.I. So that may be a focus on students, but it's also applicable in the workforce. We want to know what people think about how J.E.D.I should be handled within organizations like large businesses or professional organizations. So we have people that can speak to that. What I'm going to do is introduce the panelists by name and affiliation, but I want the panelists to all, what they're going to do is a 5-minute flash talk. And for the panelists, I want you all to describe a little bit about yourself, what sparked your interest in energy resources and related issues, and what experiences you might want to share that helped you reach your current position. In addition to your perspectives on J.E.D.I, what's your perspective of the makeup of the future energy portfolio, and whatever related issues you think are important, like extraction, exploration, environmental risk, or reclamation. And finally, how do you see higher education playing a role? I know we're talking about the energy workforce, but how does higher education properly feed into that and address J.E.D.I issues? And that's not all that, anything you want to add to that, feel free to add anything that I haven't mentioned yet. So like I said, each one of our panelists is going to give a 5-minute flash talk. We're going to start with Michelle Foss, who is a fellow at the Baker Institute of Rice University. Bridget Eiling is next, and you've already heard from her. She's on the committee. She's the director and associate professor of the Great Basin Center for Geothermal Energy at the University of Nevada, Reno. James Pippins, who is a graduate student in geophysics at Penn State. Sterling Rideout, the assistant director at the U.S. Office of Surface Mining and Reclamation. Gretchen Gillis, who is the president-elect of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. Tamika Searcy, who's a senior geologist at BP. John Hall, who's the director of regulatory and legislative affairs for the Environmental Defense Fund. Reginald Spiller, who's the principal of Azimuth Energy Investments, LLC. And we will hear again from Stephen Wells, who will also be on the panel, but he won't be giving a flash talk because we've already heard from him. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michelle Foss.
Thanks, Sherilyn. And thanks, Elizabeth, for inviting me to do this. I've been asked to talk about my views and our views on the timing of this thing that we're calling energy transition. And so I'm going to make those points within the context of what I'm doing at the Baker Institute, which is helping them to build competence on the state of non-fuel minerals, the extractive businesses associated with non-fuel minerals as part of the Center for Energy Studies. I started working on this while I was the chief energy economist at the Bureau of Economic Geology. Like most geological surveys, the BEG has a old and venerable focus on non-fuel minerals for the state of Texas. And a few years ago, I realized that all of the things that we are talking about are rooted in that arena, and I have past experience in it. I'm one of the few people out there, who have been able to straddle both the mining and minerals businesses as well as the oil and gas side of things. So I just wanted to share a few things to get this discussion going, because everyone's been thinking about this, but I was struck by some things that have happened this summer relative to the deep concerns that we have about all of this. Last summer, natural gas turbines, of which we have about 6,000 in the United States, provided about 40% and at times 45% or more of our electric power. We have 96 nuclear reactors in the country, and they provided 20%. And nuclear has performed extremely well in the United States, which I think a lot of people are starting to realize. Contrast and compare all of that to wind. Roughly 11% of our energy last summer came from 65,000, almost 66,000 wind turbines. And solar is about in the same boat. We got an average of about 3% of our electric power from almost 4,000 grid scale solar facilities. So you get the picture here. To push wind to 50% of our electric power generation will take somewhere around 500,000 turbines with all of the associated high voltage transmission, life cycle management, and everything else that I don't think anybody is prepared to really deal with. Let me add to this that probably the most heavily discussed thing, which is the introduction of electric vehicles on our roads. Pre-pandemic, we had a milestone. We hit 1 million sales of electric vehicles worldwide. And those are real vehicles. Those are passenger vehicles, not scooters, not rickshaws, but things that get produced by major auto companies, regardless of where they are. We have a global fleet of 1 billion vehicles. So as I tell people, we only have 999 more years to go if what we want is fully electrified transportation. I'm not sure that any of this is actually a really good idea. The deeper we look into it, the more problematic it is on all fronts in terms of the quality of energy, reliability, energy density, which none of this makes sense. Putting up billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure in things that cannot provide all the benefits that we get from denser fossil fuels or uranium is a mystery to me, but that seems to be what a lot of people think we ought to be doing. The mining industry in the United States, I think everybody knows, is nothing like it was when I was young and starting out and more involved in that. Rebuilding the mining industry will be deeply unpopular and very difficult to do. In any case, it would be very difficult for us to build our supply chains out the right way, because one of the distinct dilemmas in carrying out and executing on this energy transition idea is that the Chinese have very prominent positions across the board in all of the critical minerals, as well as manufacturing capacity for wind, solar, and batteries. So that ought to give you a pretty good picture. Just take every outlook that you might be accustomed to looking at, delay it by around 50 to 75 years in terms of any of the targets people discuss. Think about the amount of coordination that has to happen among policymakers and decision makers, much less what has to happen in the science and engineering world to manage all of this. And I think that you'll agree that it's going to be a slow boat. That doesn't mean that on the higher education side, people shouldn't be thinking about it. And I think Stephen gave a very nice introduction on that front that I'm sure we'll talk about more. All right, that's it for me. Thanks, Sherilyn.
Thank you. Bridget, you're going next.
Great, thanks, Sherilyn. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm Bridget Ayling, and as mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I'm also director of the Great Basin Center for Geothermal Energy, which is an applied research center that is aiming to support the increased uptake of geothermal in the US and also overseas. I've been in the geothermal sector now for almost 15 years as a geoscientist, and have been in my current position here in the US for about 5 years. And prior to that, almost 10 years working for the Australian government. In preparation for our panel discussion today, I was reflecting on my career journey to date and how I ended up in the energy sector. And also my experiences in terms of workforce diversity, particularly gender diversity. So as a kid growing up in rural New Zealand, I spent quite a bit of time outdoors and was interested in rocks and fossils from quite a young age. And quite fortunately for me, my parents kind of saw this interest and nurtured that, and kind of supported my interest by trips to the public library to get books out on geology and Christmas presents with books on geology and what have you. And so that led me to do a Bachelor of Science in Geology at Victoria University in Wellington in New Zealand. And this was, I loved it. It was exactly what I wanted to do. Although I didn't really have a clear idea of, what part of the geoscience sector I might end up working in, after my studies. But at that point, I did, become interested in paleoclimate. and did my honours thesis in kind of paleoclimate down in Antarctica, and then moved to Australia to do a PhD in paleoclimate. And so I finished this. It was great. I had a great 4 years. And after finishing it, I felt that I wanted to work in something that was more applied to actually solve some of our current kind of energy challenges and society's kind of challenges. And an opportunity to get into geothermal energy appeared working for the Australian government. And I jumped at it. It kind of ticked all my boxes. It was applied problem solving, working in renewable, clean energy really kind of resonated with me. Improving quality of life in developing countries, opportunities for some exciting travel and field work. And so I was offered the job and ran with it. And honestly, that first few years, making the change from really being a kind of environmental geochemist for my PhD into geothermal energy, it was quite a steep learning curve. And I spent a couple of years getting up to speed with that new area of work. But fortunately, my education up until that point, as well as some supportive mentors, gave me the skills I needed to adapt and be flexible, and the confidence to actually try something new and move beyond my PhD disciplines. And so I think that kind of flexibility and adaptability are going to be even more important as kind of inherent skill sets or attitudes, in fact, as we kind of plan for our energy transition and the future energy mix in the USA and globally. And having curriculums that have appropriate content that acknowledge and allow adaptive flexibility is needed, so that students are not locked into a single career path early. And I think also improving the marketing of the opportunities to be part of that energy transition, and starting that quite early as high school, even if we don't quite know what that mix will look like. But that will lead to a ultimately more resilient workforce, in my opinion. In terms of the J.E.D.I aspects, just, equitable, diverse and inclusive workforce, we know that that's going to be more resilient by engaging with all the talent in our community to help us address our energy challenges. And I guess commenting on my personal experience with gender diversity, throughout my undergraduate and graduate studies, my fellow graduate students were fairly evenly distributed in terms of gender diversity, and it wasn't really on my radar as being a possible issue. And in hindsight, I think back to the faculty, the lecturers and the research associates, and there were starkly few women in those positions, and very, very much underrepresented. And in my professional career since then, that gender gap has become even more starkly apparent, and there's just relatively few women in STEM and senior or leadership positions. And so obviously this is, broader challenge for STEM, not unique to geothermal, it's a leaky pipeline. But that's kind of led me to become a more vocal advocate for supporting diversity and gender equality. I'd like to finish by mentioning an organisation that I'm closely involved in and passionate about. It's called Women in Geothermal, also known as WING. WING is a global organisation that aims to support the professional development and empowerment of women in the geothermal sector. In the USA, women proportionally are typically less than 20% of conference authorships, conference attendees, memberships in geothermal societies. And it's taken us 40 years to get to, we're almost at 20% now. In 1980, we're at about 10%. So it's been 40 years to creep forward by 10%. So WING was established in 2013 to address gender inequality in the geothermal sector, and now has almost 2,000 members globally and 34 individual country chapters. The WING team in the US is currently the WING Global team for a 3-year term. So we're working to set strategy and goals for the next 3 years and mentoring country ambassadors from the 34 country teams. And really it's catching on like wildfire. And I think, part of it is due to our goal of having 50% male membership in WING. We really need men to be our champions and help us move the needle on women's participation in STEM disciplines in the sector. So we have several initiatives that are underway that are really exciting. I'm out of time, so I won't go on too much, but we're seeing some really positive inroads to having the conversation about it and recognizing it and improving it, and actually having more women serving in leadership positions and being involved in the sector. So it's a really exciting time, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and having open discussion. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Sherilyn.
Thanks, Bridget. And the next 5-minute flash talk will be James Pippins.
Thank you, Sherilyn. I'm James Pippin. I'm a student at Pennsylvania State University. A lot of people just call it Penn State. I'm studying, or I am there as a master's student for, oh boy. Okay, so I'm there studying for my geophysics master's degree with Dr. Chuck Amen. We're using geophysics methods to investigate structures in the lithosphere. But just a little bit about where my background comes from is that I was part of a program called this Cooperative Developmental Energy Program, or C.E.D.I. It was founded by Dr. Isaac J. Crumbly to represent the underrepresented minorities in the energy field. So whenever I was first being picked for the program, I wanted to go and study for like chemistry or something that was purposely developed for energy. So whenever I stepped foot on the Fort Valley State University, where C.E.D.I is founded, I was first going in as a chemical engineer, and I later progressed into going into mathematics, and then continuing at Penn State for my second bachelor's for geoscience. And so whenever I took those two degrees, I was able to like build upon it with 3 other internships that I was able to obtain while at Fort Valley. So those 3 internships each were basically guided to me from the program, especially from Dr. Carr, who is a person in the C.E.D.I program as like a mentor for many students. And in those internships, I went to University of Texas at Austin to study with the Texas Advanced Computing Center, looking in caves for karst features and investigating basically how water can change a cave, but also how these caves can affect mining operations and how we can incorporate imaging 3D to identify a cave, case like patterns. And then as time progressed, I went into my second internship, which was with Penn State, with the Africa Array RAU with Dr. Andrew Nyblade, and Maureen Feynman partnered with the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. So there we investigated the Bushveld complex, which is the largest platinum reserve in the world over in South Africa. And that was probably one of the most influential parts of my development to where I am now. And then my third internship was with the IRIS, or International Research Institute of Seismology. There I worked with Dr. Tolulope Ologbaji, where I was looking at lithospheric structures, which is what I'm really interested in continuing in my master's with Chuck. And we are there with University of Maryland, and then ended up in the University of Rochester to finish that internship up. And that's all before I even stepped foot to get my geoscience bachelor's at Penn State. So I had all that built up information that was provided to me from a program for underrepresented minorities. And that aspect to me is something that has to not just grow, but continue on and on and on. Because the idea that energy is the future is really just, it's never ending. So a phrase I was talking to Elizabeth, one of the chair members, was that whenever you think about a battery, there's an anode and a cathode. Those two elements will be consumed and drawn and finished. So that is, a battery is an energy source. It has a start and an end cycle. So there has to be some other bracket of energy that has to be developed or found as time progresses. And that is something that I pictured back in chemistry class back in high school. And that's what really like drove me to go into to continue my education, get bachelor's degrees, and now I'm here getting my master's. It's all just the idea that energy has an end and some other source needs to be there to fill that gap. I'm probably I want to go ahead and just like cut my little thing short, because like that's the main idea that I have with energy, but we need to have people there that are supporting it as it continues. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and end it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, James. The student perspective is so critical to this discussion. Next, after James, is Sterling Rideout. I think you're still muted.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. Thank you, Sherlyn and Elizabeth, for giving me this opportunity to talk. Michelle Foss, you've done a great job definitely in discussing the energy sector and the global challenges as relate to mining, oil, and gas due to the global economy. And I'm just start off and just thinking about how did I get where I gotten and how did I get into the energy field? And I just want to start just on a personal story. You know, I was a kid in the city, was always intellectually curious, read a lot of subjects as it related to science, astronomy, biology, and chemistry. And James, we got some similarities because I was a chemistry and a chemical engineering major at one time. And as a kid, I liked the idea of the flow of the logic and the objective analysis and the decision making when you're looking at observing phenomena and coming up with solutions for various challenges as it relates to the scientific method. So that always drove me, even with all the distractions from growing up in the city. And so that kept me focused. You know, I worked in a number of organizations, state, private, federal, dealing with energy and environmental related technologies. And I agree with Bridget, you definitely have to have that flexibility and adaptability. So I'll look back and one of the things I wondered, what made me successful? There was a number of things I could say, yes, what made me successful, but one of the things I would agree was having the opportunity to be a part of an organization and just given the chance to learn in a collegial environment while you make mistakes and also learn from the mistakes. So I'll give you an example. Even before I started my career, when I was in college, my grandmother passed, so I had to come home. And when I was home, I had to find me a summer job. Back then, you didn't have you didn't have an online platform, so you had to do everything face to face. So I had to go down to the unemployment office. And you know, going to the unemployment office when you're a young kid could be challenging or intimidating because I'm sitting there with men and mostly men, but women also that's 10, 15, 20 years my senior as I look for a job. It was pretty stressful watching everyone in the room waiting to get their number called just so they can have a potential job interview or a job. I would go down to the office every day, sit there for hours and never would hear my name. After a few weeks, one of the lead persons in the unemployment office saw that I was consistently coming to that office and decided an opportunity to open up. He called me, hey, we got an interview for you to be a painter. You know, I'm a summer student, I'm a college student, painter, I'm good with it. The interview, which I didn't realize was with a major paint manufacturing facility. I go into the interview and the QA manager said to me, this is your lucky day, you should play the lottery. So I'm thinking he's joking, and he repeated the statement again. he was excited that my major was in chemistry. And he said that, no, we're not going to hire you as a painter. We're going to hire you as a quality control inspector. So in my mind, I'm like, wow, as opposed to a painter. Right there on the spot, I had to take 2 tests, fill out an extensive amount of paperwork, and I got the job. My immediate supervisor, who was a QA manager, mentored me and advised me throughout my summer employment. And I was just shocked that even though I was a chemistry major, I was able to learn things like machine capability tests, utilizing statistical analysis to correct machine errors, utilization of data to ensure a product meets the customer requirements, understanding the manufacturing process of painter products, also teamwork communication, of course, and with workers who are significantly older and not necessarily helpful in the beginning. I say that to say, this is what, to me, J.E.D.I should be. You know, someone saw a potential in me as a young person and decided to give me the opportunity and mentored me and created an environment, even though there were some folks who was opposed to me being there, of succeeding. And I think that's what one of the major things as all of us dealing with the energy sector, we need to do as far as making sure that we diversify as far as women, persons of color, and a number of diverse workforce. And so that was just one of the examples I had, you know, that kind of sparked me as far as staying with technology, always trying something different, never settle for one sector, trying to learn as much as possible. I wound up also going to get an MBA and as well as a master's in technology management. And I just want to say that one of the things kids, and including myself, that's consistent with learning is problem solving, critical analysis, teamwork, collaboration, and always open to learn new things, and also being flexible. So I'll end my discussion there.
Thank you, Sterling. Next is Gretchen Gillis.
Thank you, Sherilyn. I'm really honored to be part of this panel and really enjoyed what Sterling had to say. One of my favorite colleagues, who's a geologist now, began as a chemistry major and did some quality control for Skippy peanut butter. So I see that chemists go on to do great things. So I should start by saying that as president-elect of AAPG, I am not the official spokesman, so I'm speaking for myself in this panel today. I can say that I had really supportive parents and the benefits that came with that in terms of really good schools, an undergraduate degree at Bryn Mawr College, which is a women's college in Pennsylvania, and then a graduate experience at the University of Texas at Austin. And I had the benefit of not having to really worry about a career until really I was finishing up my master's degree. And so as I was finishing up at the University of Texas, there were a lot of oil companies that were recruiting on campus. And I thought, okay, this looks simple enough. But my master's thesis about Precambrian metamorphic rocks didn't land me a job with Exxon or Shell or Chevron or Mobil or Texaco or probably close to 30 companies that I interviewed with. But as Sterling was talking about, there was a company that I guess saw potential and offered me a job, and that was Maxis Exploration Company. So they took me on as an exploration geologist, and I had a lot of on-the-job learning, but I also quickly learned at that time about the harsh cycles of the oil and gas industry. And so subconsciously, I realized that I was making job changes to make sure that I would never be laid off, because that was my career motivating fear. And so eventually I made a career pivot to a communications role at Schlumberger. And once I joined Schlumberger, I realized that the operating companies I had worked for were not nearly as diverse. And so Schlumberger really gave me a terrific introduction to what a diverse company that thrives on innovation and teamwork can do. So that was a really interesting career pivot that really broadened my view of what diversity in the workforce is. And then after a few years at Schlumberger, I made a career pivot back to geology, working for Aramco Americas, which is a subsidiary of Saudi Aramco, and found myself on another fascinating cultural learning curve, which I'm still enjoying today. In thinking about J.E.D.I, I guess I think we need to be concerned about the pool at all stages. Starting with young kids who need to realize that anyone can study math and science and pursue those fields at the university level. As part of this, I think approachable role models are really critical. Not necessarily superheroes who can be so intimidating, but approachable role models who show you that, yes, human beings like us can be successful. And so I think that's really important. Certainly, it's been important to me as a woman in the oil and gas industry. And I did a little bit of crowdsourcing with my contemporaries about approachable role models. And I was delighted that Sherilyn's name came up a whole bunch of times as one of the role models that oil and gas geologists today look to. So that was really, really a nice feeling to know that I'm among this crowd. So I think to wrap up, I'll say that whatever the solutions for energy in the future are going to be, I think that flexible and creative and curious people are going to be part of the teams that make it happen. And so to make that work, we're really going to need to use the entire talent pool that exists. I think the business literature is pretty easy to search to realize that diverse teams produce better results. And I think we just need to make that happen in every organization that we interact with. So thank you for inviting me to be here. And I'm happy to pass back to Sherilyn.
Thank you so much for those comments, Gretchen. Tamika Searcy is up next.
Hello, I'm Tamika Searcy. I'm a senior geoscientist with a 15-year plus career at BP. I also serve as the Petroleum Systems Analyst Community of Practice Lead at BP. And I believe today I'm serving on the panel in a sense to illustrate the importance of investments into programs for STEM diversity and inclusion. Simple for the fact of my entire educational and professional career. So I'll just give a little background of the last 40 years, really, of how it starts. So I'm from Georgia, a small town in rural Georgia called Butler, for my parents, Willie and Betty Searcy. And if you are familiar with the oil and gas business, Georgia is one of those states where there hasn't been any discovery of successful cumulative hydrocarbons. So with that fact of me being from Georgia and currently having a 15-year career in oil and gas stands out. And I credit that from the previous mentioned program led by Dr. Isaac J. Crumbly, which is at Fort Valley State University. It is a historically Black college and university. And that program was previously mentioned was Cooperative Developmental Energy Program. And it started in 1983 during somewhat of the, one of the peaks of oil and gas at the time after fossil fuels took over a bit of the coal energy supply during the early 70s is kind of when fossil fuels transitioned more into or more oil and gas took over coal development. And then in 1983 is the development of cooperative developmental energy program. And that program really was set out to increase minorities in the energy industry. It started out with an internship program. And then in 1993, I was amongst the first academy. It was a summer academy called Mathematics, Science, and Engineering Academy at Fort Valley State University, where students, high school students, was exposed to energy specific disciplines. And that's where I got the passion of geology. I had no idea of this discipline even, really. I just know my parents said, hey, my mom remembered that I was interested in rocks laying around, and we always went on trips, so I always observed, rivers and mountains, and intrigued by the different diversity of our landscapes, but never truly knew geoscience in a sense. But with MC, mathematics, science, engineering, we are exposed to how we can apply our passion of math and science. Because I was always excited by math and science, smart in everything else, but what excited me was math and science. And then once I got into the Fort Valley State University's program, I was really embedded into how energy plays a various role to supplying the lights and how we can understand the earth to really supply energy to the world. And so I was first exposed to engineering, and I did not like it. Engineering was not for me. Going through the program of summer, I was not that invention type or of any type. But the next year, we were exposed at University of Oklahoma to geology, and that's where my passion started. And I really accredit that summer program to exposing me to something new and understanding the mountains and how that played a difference. Not only did we get exposure to the academics of the energy industry, we were exposed to the different job opportunities, so different workplaces, such as the nuclear plants, Oakland, Tennessee facilities, different laboratories. When we went out to Las Vegas, we went to the Yucca Mountain project, so understanding the nuclear aspects to that. And then we then began to, as we got older, got exposed to oil and gas. And I was super excited by the oil and gas industry and the risk of oil and gas industry. And knowing that geoscience was somewhat of the start of an oil and gas project. And so that really excited me at being somewhat of a risk taker and understanding how geosciences was an integrated project where we understood the earth sciences and then brought it into the engineering world to develop and explore that opportunity. So for me, it just, it felt right to go into Fort Valley State's scholarship program and study geology. So before you get your geology degree, you also have a bachelor's in one of your chosen discipline. And for me, it was chemistry. And chemistry actually turns out to be not just a backup program, but it's what I use today. I'm specifically a geochemist at BP. So I've had an opportunity where I combine my geology and my chemistry background at Fort Valley State University and put into a full-time position at BP. So along the way of my university training, I had 5 internships, which is also unique. It's built up a strong passion as well as good standard background for my geosciences as a professional. So, which is, rare to find 5 internships as an undergraduate and 1 year as a grad student. But that's really geared to the makeup of CDEP, where you don't just expose them to the academics, you expose them to the career. So having a program that is supported by private sectors and the government, supplying summer jobs is key, because you're building up a student's curriculum and fully understanding how they will apply their academics to their job set. So that is really essential when you're building up any student, but particularly a minority who may not be exposed to various industries when they're growing up as a young child. And in itself, my career path and success has been embedded into various energy and supply demands around the globe. I speak that when I spoke about when I entered CDEP, it was a clear change of expiration of fossil fuels with the variability of just the fossil fuel itself, from being kind of the nice sweet oils to heavier fluids. That really changed the industry in itself, of how you develop these heavy fluids. And now, and understanding how do you actually turn that into energy. So that changed the market in itself. And then also unconventionals came into play. My first position at BP was a North American gas field. And at that time, North American gas was $12. I mean, gas is $12 of MCF. Now it's $2.50. Oil was $40. So we're kind of getting back to it, but things cost more. So again, my entire kind of career profession has been in a mix of transition. And even today, in August of 2020, BP, the company I work for, I'm not speaking on them, but has announced that it's transitioning from an international oil company to an integrated energy company, which, for us at BP, we're all, in a sense, trying to understand how our skill set can be embedded into this new company type. And with that, I think, for instance, when the industry stepped into deep water, I saw my academics actually change in the shift of what we were learning. We were learning more about deep water environments. So that geology from the oil and gas business actually was fed back into the academics. And that's what we have to do going forward with this energy change. And it comes the collaboration between the energy industry as well as the academics has to be embedded together to ensure that we train the students properly and give them that opportunity and background. So again, not just kind of the academic part. Throughout my life, I've always been involved with community involvement. And so that development of being, say, in a sorority, or I currently also recruit at BP, it has given me somewhat of responsibility to the community. And with that being said, I think that's kind of the energy shift, in the world. If we're going to change to a low carbon scenario, or reducing the carbon release, it's more of as a geoscientist, you become more responsible for your community, for your people, and also the environment. So it's been an exciting career at BP at 15 years. And I look forward to the change of transition. I also look forward to continuing my efforts of diversity. And I'll end there. Sorry.
Thanks, Tamika. That was great. Next is John Hall. I think you're still muted.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to offer comments regarding our conversation today. My name is John Hall. I have worked on environmental issues for the past 25 years. Earlier in my career, I served as chairman of what is now the state's primary environmental agency. And prior to that, I worked in state government in Texas, responsible for overseeing the state of Texas royalty interest on about 12 million acres of land. I have worked to address Texas's challenging environmental issues for the past 25 years. And as we talk about the energy transition that is underway, my comments will reflect on a couple of concerns. First of all, I believe it is imperative as we move forward to address the significant environmental issues pertaining to the production and use of fossil fuels. In Texas today, as I believe, as is the case around the country and around the world, much of our air pollution problem comes from refining and petrochemical facilities, the production of oil and gas, and of automobiles, particularly automobiles that use oil and gas, that use gasoline, diesel, compressed natural gas, and propane to operate. It's important to address these emissions, to reduce these emissions, to improve public health, but also to address climate change. And I believe that if we do not move forward to address these issues and the huge environmental justice and equity issues that the fossil fuel industry has contributed to, it will cause serious, continued serious issues and problems throughout our society, particularly in communities of color. In addition to addressing the overall environmental challenges in the energy sector, particularly with regard to fossil fuel, I believe it is also imperative that we move forward in the near future to begin to systematically address the environmental justice and equity issues that have emerged over time. I'm a big fan of the growth of clean energy resources in this state, around the country, and the world, because they hold the opportunity to substantially reduce health-based pollution, as well as those emissions that are contributing to climate change. I am concerned, however, that the trillion-dollar clean energy industry that is emerging and the significant momentum that zero-emission vehicles have gained, that those industries hold the promise of providing millions of jobs. And I am concerned that though they are in the early stages of their development, that they are not engaging in a systematic and proactive manner with communities of color. So I am concerned that unless they begin to do so, and unless we put in place policies and practices to ensure that they do, we may see these growing, promising industries develop similar adverse relationships with communities of color as the fossil fuel industry has in the past. While I am concerned, I am also optimistic about the role that technology and innovation can play in addressing the various concerns I have. At Environmental Defense Fund, we have completed numerous analyses that show that the technology exists today for us to cost-effective address the health and climate concerns relating to the use of all types of fuels. It's important for us to develop the political will and the commitment to invest a modest proportion of the revenues that the energy sector provides to address the challenges and the problems that it causes. Important to that, of course, is addressing a longstanding concern, and that is that within the energy sector, communities of color have benefited less than other groups in terms of the significantly the well-paying jobs that they provide and the other opportunities that they provide. So I'm hopeful that during the course of the remaining portion of this conversation, we will have opportunity to further address these issues. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, John, and for bringing up environmental justice, which is also a very important part of this discussion. The next 5-minute flash talk is from Reginald Spiller.
Can you see me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can. You were breaking up a little bit, but we can hear you fine now.
Yeah, my internet appears to be a little bit unstable. I see here. I hope we're okay. Has industry and academic and government experience. I've had the pleasure of serving on the CER board 2 terms and on the Beezer board for several terms. I began my career as a hydrogeologist and then ended up becoming a petroleum geologist. And over my 40-year period of experience, I've had the pleasure of working in 80 different countries, both in the energy and the mining sector. So as I sort of reflect on these years, particularly here in the US, the diversity of the geoscience population has actually been remarkably small. And it's unfortunate for such a great field, something that we love and we're all passionate about. So during this time, I spent a large chunk of my effort looking to bring fresh blood into the geosciences, into our field, identifying students, supporting them with capital and mentoring them. I can remember when Tamika Searcy was just a young student at OU, and we were introduced to each other through the National Association of Black Geoscientists almost 20 years ago. We've worked through the Mickey Leland Energy Fellowship Fund, which is really a Department of Energy program. And I want to continue doing this because I still see the earth and engineering sciences as a good place for young people to choose as a career. But look, these students have a choice. To go work with.
So Reggie, maybe if you turn off your video while you're speaking, it'll help for now.
And outside the oil and gas, Steve Wells comments that the
Carolyn, I'm not sure if we lost Reg there. He might have to reconnect, but maybe we can move to a little break while we see what's going on there and pick things up after the break.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Maybe he'll get his bandwidth back after that, and we can let him finish up.
Can you hear me?
You're back, Reggie, I think, but you're kind of in and out.
Yeah, this is
Reggie, I think what we're gonna do to
Yeah, this is
give a
Reggie. Let's do
chance
that.
to-
Eight,
Are you on now?
yeah, AT&T is not cooperating.
Okay, I think we can hear you. You're marked, I'm seeing you as muted, but I can hear you.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Reggie, I'm suggesting that for the time being, you turn off your video. That might give you more bandwidth for audio. And it's off now, but maybe if you try again. We were discussing breaking now and then coming back, restarting at 2 o'clock because you were the last panelist, and then maybe we can give you a few minutes to finish what you were saying before we launch into the discussion. Okay, he's disconnected. Okay, so Jim.
Oh yeah, well, let's go ahead. I think we've had a great set of talks where we'll give Reggie a chance. We'll ask everybody to kind of tune in. Let's take 10 minutes, and I know we had 15 on the agenda, but that way we'll ready to go start. Everybody be back a couple minutes before 2, and we'll get ready to get underway right at 2. And in the meantime, Eric or Elizabeth, can you kind of let Reggie know what we're doing?
Yes, we'll do that, Jim. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, we will see everybody at back on at 2 p.m. Take a quick break and get yourself a little bit of coffee or tea or whatever, and we'll look forward to reconnecting in a few minutes.
apologies for the internet going down. Let me just say that I think that the students that we've been talking about, these are the STEM students, they've got a lot of choices. They've got a lot of choices, particularly when we're competing with groups out of Silicon Valley. And as Steve Wells mentioned, there's this big shift away from oil and gas. And we also see this shift in students towards the international focus. Sherilyn, you and I have seen, and Tamika and I have seen within the NABG, that shift happen. Many of the members, many of the students that are now members of the NABG are international students. And so we really see this shift. So as we focus focusing our efforts on women and minorities should not just be let's do it for diversity's sake. Diversity is a good thing. But I think as professionals, we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we capture these students, what we call capturing market share. Making sure that we really direct those students into the earth and engineering sciences. So ultimately, the question ends up being, what's really missing from what we've been doing in the past 40 years of trying to bring students into the earth and engineering sciences? What's really missing in the mix? I'd say one of the big components is the American student, American minority student. That's what's missing. Those people are really missing from the mix. And the other thing that's really missing, it's the people at the top. We've spent 40 years, everyone talks about bringing students into the mix, but unless you've really got deans and faculties and CEOs, boardroom members, assistant secretaries, unless you really have those people there as role models. Gretchen talked about you, Sherilyn, being a role model. Unless we have people like you, unless we have people like Tamika Searcy at the top at BP, then there's a very, very critical element to sustaining diversity in the workforce. So I'm really absolutely focused on making sure that groups like the National Academy of Science and the Geological Society of America, we do our part to make sure we identify qualified and top-notch geoscientists, make sure they're at the top. That goes a long, long way. And then finally, if we're going to be a people-centric country, a people-centric organization, where everybody's opinion is valued, then diversity really is at the heart of that. If you're a student of stochastic modeling, artificial intelligence, or machine learning, you know that the larger the data set, the better the outcome and prediction, as opposed to some sort of deterministic approach. So I say, let's be like Mike. That's the football or basketball analogy. Let's have some good role models out there. And if you do that, I think you'll continue to bring good quality students into the arena. So thanks for bearing with the internet shutdown, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Reggie. That was why I suggested having you last, because I knew you'd have a good wrap up. And I think that this is a fantastic set of comments, I guess I should say, for these 5-minute flash talks. And there were a lot of questions that came up to my mind, but what I want to do is start to put some questions that have come in from the audience to the panel to address. And then if my questions don't come up in the discussion, I'll throw those in at the end. But I also have a question for Jim and Elizabeth at this point. There were a couple of questions that I think didn't get addressed for Stephen Wells. After Stephen Wells' talk, they were specific to Stephen Wells. And since he is part of the panel, I think I'd like to start with those questions first before we get to the ones that came up from the general panel discussion. So the first one that I thought was really interesting is from Wes Patrick, who says, in his experience, the imposter syndrome is not limited to minority groups and people of color, and that this person experienced it as a lower middle class, rural, first generation white student. And I totally get that. And the question is, do you see or have you seen any benefit in looking beyond color and ethnicity to find other common ground factors that will help bridge the gap? So any panelist can answer that, but I think it came up after Stephen Wells' talk.
Well, Sherilyn, let me just start and by saying that having grown up as a first generation rural kid, I get it completely. I felt like, I don't think it was the imposter came to mind, but it was something like that. You just feel out of place. And so I think Wes is absolutely right. I responded to him saying that, yes, there is a connection. And what I'd like to do is go back into our data set and see the mix of underrepresented versus white kids that are answering that way. But what I think would be useful is to let our students know now that these are the questions that people are saying before they transition, as they transition into the workplace, and say, we all have these kinds of feelings. And so many of our kids are from rural areas in New Mexico that I think it's a really good point, and I appreciate Wes bringing that up. So thank you.
Do any of the other panelists have something you want to add to that?
This is John Hall. I will say this. In my remarks, I focus my comments on communities of color. But I think that one of the biggest challenges we face today is not just persons who fall into those categories, but people from backgrounds that are having a hard time, be it because of where they live, be it because of their income. And I think besides the issue of environmental justice, the issue of equity is important, so that we are putting in place policies and programs to move forward individuals who face economic challenges, many of whom are from rural areas. I grew up in a rural community picking and chopping cotton. So I'm familiar with the barriers that exist with regard to persons from rural backgrounds and rural communities. But education and being provided an opportunity paved the way for me to have the opportunities that I've had. But we don't, in this country, it may be that we have reached a point today where income limitations are, I won't say are as important as issues pertaining to racial equality, but are certainly important and need to be addressed as we seek to broaden economic opportunities and grow our economy and improve the quality of life for all of our citizens.
Thanks, John. So let's move on to the second question that was also came up after Stephen Wells' talk, which is from Maya Chelly. And you noted that many underrepresented students have expressed interest in renewable energy and humanitarian goals. Have you conducted any comprehensive studies of early career students on why they came to NMT and of seniors regarding why they stayed, and evaluated that across ethnicity and gender?
Yes, Sherilyn, we've not done a very good job at collecting quantitative data. We've done this all qualitatively, and so that's something that we have to improve significantly. But interestingly, one of the things that attracts students, both from rural areas, from underrepresented populations, is the return on the value they get. They know that for the price of our tuition, that they get an outstanding education and a great opportunity for jobs. And that reputation is what we leverage. And so if you ask them, that's probably the number one thing that they'll say. I got an outstanding education and for a price, and my debt load is low. And I think debt load is another really critical thing that we have to talk about for J.E.D.I, being equitable, as we were just discussing. So quantitative data, we need to ramp that up, but if you just qualitatively assess students, it's essentially return on investment.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to add a little something to that from my recent research and work in J.E.D.I as well, is that we have several people here who've talked about programs like yours and programs like CDEP, which is one program basically, and other programs are built in that, are being built in that image. And I think that that's a really critical, the financial aspect is really critical. So if students don't have the means to pay for their jobs or for their schooling, scholarships will help, is one of the most critical parts, I think, for helping increase diversity. So either you don't come out of school with this big financial burden, or you, if you weren't able to pay for it, you have support to pay for it. So I just wanted to echo that. And I think that these kind of programs are so critical.
May I just follow up to that point?
Yes.
Yeah, just, I don't want to take too much time, but there was, I think it was Sterling that pointed out that they had family issues and they had to drop out and then try to get back and seek a job. And, you know, that hits at the heart. And one of the things that we've done is every year we have industry sponsored golf tournaments called the President's Golf Tournament. And the proceeds from that go into a fund to help students exactly in those situations where the student has a family issue. And this happens with these rural, in particular Hispanic students. They have to step out, take care of the family. We guarantee that they have that money to come back and support themselves to finish. So I think we have to think again, as you're pointing out, more creatively about how we support students as well, so that we keep that burden, that debt burden, and low, and allow them to continue doing what they have to do with their families and the challenges they face with their families. Thank you. Yes,
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to another question or combination type of question that came up this is for the whole panel. So I'd like to know if the panelists see any connection, or the audience wants to know if the panelists sees any connection between having better J.E.D.I in the workforce and dealing with what many see as endemic environmental justice issues. So do you see connection? And if you see a connection, what is it? J.E.D.I in the workforce, endemic environmental justice issues.
This is Sterling. I'll jump in. That's a pretty complex question, because when I think about the J.E.D.I, when it comes to the workforce, one of the things I've seen, I worked in the nuclear energy field, and what I saw is that a lot of the folks who was part of that workforce was rural people of not of color, and a lot of those opportunities were like generation. You know, my grandfather, my great grandfather all worked at this facility, and the diversity wasn't there. And one of the things I realized from my travels was, one, a lot of people of color are not aware of the opportunities. And so you don't know you could take certain STEM degrees and bridge it into certain types of workforce. And then when it comes to environmental justice, a lot of that is economic based. You know, when I was a kid, I used to live right across from a landfill. But of course, you know, right across from a landfill. Why? Because it was a low income area. They wasn't gonna get any opposition. And so you see that throughout the country, you know, whether white or black, environmental justice is based on income and opposition. And it's only recently now that you see environmental justice where people are pushing back. And so you can make the case they follow parallel tracks, but you know, the environmental justice, a lot of it's economic based. And the people who don't have the resources to push back are normally the low income folks.
Thanks, Sterling. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Hello.
Okay.
I will.
Go ahead.
I think, using my experience at BP, the country has experienced a few environmental issues with hydrocarbons, in a sense, and one of them was from BP and the oil spill in 2010. And what came out of that regarding J.E.D.I, it did affect, areas of where there was diversity, where there was minorities, and jobs were affected. And how BP stood up was having people from that area, and particularly Black individuals, making sure they were in the community, speaking to the community to understand what their needs were and what their, are there any hesitations on any claims, being in assistance and being upfront, being present and showing that we were being responsible after the fact. And so that really helped, having someone of color being present and responding to the questions the community had. So that in itself was very powerful, I believe, for BP to stand up and ensure that diversity was on the front lines as well as the entire company. And secondly, I think when Georgia in particular, when there was a storm that was affected and pipelines were destroyed at the time, BP was one of the companies that brought in fuels. I don't know if you'll remember, there was a shortage of fuels at one time. And so BP was one of the companies that took out the time to deliver the fuels. And that was the responsibility of the higher community. But the fact that I was at BP at the time and I gave feedback to the CEO and various leaders at the time to say how appreciative I was that it looked out for the company. So showing a personal response to your company to say, hey, this is how you helped out, because just showing an appreciation also makes the company even more responsible to the environment. It gives them kind of a personal feel to it. And so, having BP being a diverse and inclusive situation at that time helped, because it inspired them to do more, I think. So that is two examples that I've seen for J.E.D.I.
Thanks, Tamika. And I agree with Sterling that this is a really complex issue, and I think there's a lot of moving parts that have to come into that. But what I want to do now is sort of focus us back to the workforce issues, because the type that this meeting is about J.E.D.I and the future workforce for energy. And one of the questions that came in is related to that, which is how do you see the impact of the future of oil and gas and the calls for energy transition on geosciences? Actually, there's two questions. Secondly, what are your thoughts on attracting non-traditional students into the pipeline, for example, kids with interest in statistics or AI and machine learning, but not necessarily subsurface in geo? And I'm not on the panel. I want to start with an answer to that, because I don't think you can separate those. If somebody is interested in AI and machine learning and interested in subsurface and geo, they should learn. You don't have to be a geologist, but you need to learn some geo, and geologists need to familiarize themselves with that too, because that's the future, right? Combining big data management with applied problems is what we have to do. And so when we talk about diversity, we need to deal with diversity on all fronts. So diversity for people, diversity for expertise, and diversity of solutions. And that's my 2 cents. And I want to throw it out that and answer other answers to that question out to the rest of the panel.
Hey, Cheryl, let me jump in here. I'm not going to turn my video on because of my bandwidth, but let me address the AI machine learning question. I can remember as a young geologist at Exxon talking to the chief geophysicist and him telling me that 3D surveys were never going to be used. They were too expensive, that we do things on paper. Now, this is like 1982, 1983. So we had somebody who was really just not willing to even think about what does a colored seismic section look like? You know, it was all black and white. And so there was this difficulty in jumping and accepting the technology. So here we are today. And how do we really integrate the geosciences with, you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT? And we say that there are really three things that can happen that make for real good futures for geosciences. One, using these new techniques, ultimately the goal is to increase production. You know, you want to really do that, but also to reduce the operating cost. And you know, if you look at where our industry is headed, if you want to make it sexy, let's put some technology into it. But if you want to make it safe, then machine learning and artificial intelligence really does make for a safer workplace and a more cost-effective way of complying with regulatory environment. And so those are kind of the connections between those two things. So I don't think they can be separate. I feel very good about the future. Our trick is, what do we really do to bring American kids? And I'm serious about this. It's, you know, Steve Wells is right. The students that are caught in the time series that are 15 to 20 years behind Europe and the US, those students come from institutions where the resources are just being developed. And so those students are interested in the geosciences, but it's those American students, those minority American students, those are the ones I think we have to target. And unless we do a good job in the States with our educational systems to attract those kids, we're going to have to import foreign students, foreign workers to pick up those jobs that we know are going to be around. So my perspective on the technology and on the shift that Stephen Wells has talked about.
Yeah, so I said that students who aren't interested in subsurface and geo, but are interested in machine learning, AI, and statistics, right now, the way this stuff is being applied is, you know, you need a subject matter expert to sit next to you as a person who is the AI machine learning expert. But in the future, those two things should overlap a little bit more, because
Yes.
if you go into a lot, I've seen a lot of complaints of people who went straight into machine learning, AI, you know, got their degrees, and then they got plunked into an area to analyze the data that they were not familiar with. So we're getting there, but I think that was one of the big problems with that. So to answer that question, I think there's a pathway for those students in energy, because it's needed. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
I would. So just because like I'm entering into my master's degree and I'm about to finish up my first semester, I've been throwing around different ideas that I could go to actually like pursue and finish my master's thesis. But like you can look and open up any of these like major science journals, and you'll find like information on AI and machine learning techniques that are being used in geoscience. But if you actually like dive deeper and figure out where these people are from, they're from like computer engineering or like computer-based backgrounds, and then they're stepping foot into geoscience. And usually it starts with them being interested in physics or something where they know they can apply it, but then the geology aspect is then being applied into the idea of physics. So then it becomes geophysics. So like, just as an example, there's people who are investigating over in California to be able to detect an earthquake and be able to signal that out. But in order to understand where the aftershocks are being generated from, they're using machine learning to basically interpolate or extrapolate where those aftershocks are coming from. And it's that idea that like a person can't like be like, yeah, I'm assuming it's going to be there or there, but the machine itself is able to tell you the probability of it being in different locations. But that right there is something that a person can only do so much, but they can't do it at the rate that a machine can be taught to do it. And so that's where the application and safety, or just like what Spiller was just saying, where the rate of production, just the capabilities of producing information or product, it can become more efficient with machine learning, but there has to be like a way that you can like basically combine the ideas in a field, like Cheryl was just saying. And that's like, I feel is not well understood, but there are people out there that are doing it. And so, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So our first flash panelist, Michelle Foss, made some interesting comments about what our energy sources are and how we're what the energy mix actually is, right? So I'm switching topics a little bit here to talk about how we balance how we're using energy, what energy we're using, and the transition to clean energy. And on the other side of that, we had comments from, I believe it was from John, about how we have the resources to actually produce fossil fuels cleanly, and for the future, we know there's still going to be a strong reliance on energy sources that produce CO2, which is, of course, why BP and other oil companies are putting a lot of focus on CO2 capture, use, and storage. But I would like to hear from Michelle and about more about which sources of energy and how we can we're using and how we can address environmental issues as we make this transition, because one of the things John said was that we need the political will. And when you're talking about companies, and the bottom line is the thing that is driving their decisions, how do you develop that political will? And I'm talking about energy transition, but political will is also required for effectively implementing J.E.D.I as well in your workforce and in the way you deal with society. So anything you want to address, anybody on that topic, I think I'd like to get the panelists to weigh in on that.
Sherilyn, I would like to make a few comments, if I may. First of all, I live in the state of Texas. I work in the state of Texas, which is commonly called the energy capital of the nation, where oil and gas has historically been king. One of the most interesting things that's occurred today is that in Texas, wind and solar power has taken off in the electricity sector, not because of subsidies, but because they are the cheapest sources of electricity, and they happen not to generate emissions, or very limited levels of emissions. So in Texas, we are on track because of economic factors for wind and solar power to account for 2/3 of the electricity that's been being used in the state of Texas by 2030. Currently stands at 38%. And so we're well on the way there. On the other hand, while I'm a strong proponent of companies, of government and companies embracing clean energy because of the economy and cost savings and emission reduction benefits, I recognize that with the billions of people we have in this world, there will be a role for fossil fuel to play, but it has to be cleaned up. And today it is very economical, for example, but it's not being done to reduce methane emissions in oil and gas operations. Can be done for 1% of the total revenues that are being generated.
And can I interrupt you really quickly just to ask you one question specific to that? What do you say to a person who is opposed to efforts to capture methane and CO2 because it only encourages oil and gas companies to continue to produce? And this is what I'm talking about with when we address political will. I've heard that argument before. Well, we don't want to support that because that just means we'll continue to be reliant on oil and gas. So there's it seems to be a big educational component for the whole population about how these things are intertwined and what things impact other things. So if you're going to use oil and gas, maybe we should, you should capture the methane and the CO2.
That's where I am. It can be done, and it should be done.
Yes.
If it's not done, those resources will fall by the wayside.
Yes, I agree. So, but how about, I know that wind turbines, at least I read an article that wind turbines generate a lot of, once they fail, they go into these big dumps, right? That's another environmental issue. And then for solar, you have to do a lot of mining for the minerals that go into creating the solar panels. So is that included in the environmental impact of cleaner energy? So maybe they're not polluting the air, but they may be polluting in other ways.
And I would just say real quickly that I think it's the responsibility of the wind and solar industry to address and to be required to address the adverse effects of those sources of power, to make sure that we're not creating long-lasting problems that are not addressed. But I'm a strong believer in technology and innovation. I've seen technology be utilized in a cost-effective manner to address all kinds of problems. I remember working on air quality issues in Houston, Texas 15 years ago. And all of the petrochemical and refinery companies said that if we have to reduce our NOx emissions by 80%, we will all shut down and move ashore. Guess what happened? They engaged in research and development. They met that 80% reduction. And over the past 15 years, every one of them have grown exponentially and are producing more product than ever, are making more money than ever, because they invested in research and development and new technologies that solve the problem. And I think that if one of the things we need to always be doing is focusing on new technology innovation aimed at addressing any remaining problems associated with any energy source, because it can be done, and it can be done cost effectively. We need government to step in, but we also need companies to embrace their responsibilities to be good stewards.
Yes, thank you. Michelle, did you want to address this topic of which energy sources we're using and how we're managing them?
Well, I think a lot of that was just said. What I would say, though, is that there are a lot of things that people don't know well enough and don't understand enough in order to think about how to do these things. For one, every alternative energy technology that we want to use is going to require hydrocarbons. That's a controversial statement that a lot of people don't want to hear, but it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's coatings for wind turbines, lubricants, cases for battery cells and packs, composites for vehicle designs, you name it, there are hydrocarbon molecules in that mix. And the problem with every imagination, every bit of imagination that people have about the future of hydrocarbons in particular, is that the leveraging effect from between using them as fuels and procuring them from materials is enormous. When you drill a well, you're producing molecules that are going to go into markets for lots of different uses. That helps to amortize the cost of the well. It makes the economics of the business work. There isn't anything else out there that's like this. And that is a serious problem, a serious dilemma. So if you pursue any of the other alternative energy technologies that people want to pursue, then you have to have options for all of the things that you don't get from those. So you have to have something for energy storage because you can't get that from intermittent energy sources. You need something from materials because you're not going to get that from other options. This is a fundamental dilemma that people just are failing to recognize. And I think it needs to be a priority in the research community. And if I was guiding students today who want to work on this stuff, I would say, okay, here it is. This is the grand challenge. It's a materials problem. You have to go out and figure it out, because if you can't, we can't figure it out. I also think that for kids that are interested in going into fields where they're going to engage more on the environmental issues, I get that people are interested in this stuff for possible improvements in air sheds. So there, you drive electric vehicles, you're taking tailpipe emissions off the road, all of that's fine. But it's all in how you manufacture them. So for people who care about, I guess, global emissions in all of this, and it's a driver for a lot of it, if we try to accelerate things really fast, the reason why let me back up and say that the reason why stuff is cheap is because it's manufactured in China, and people don't understand how huge and a factor that is. It's their surplus manufacturing capacity for wind and solar that makes all of that stuff cheap. It's their surplus manufacturing capacity for batteries that make all of that cheap, and they control the intellectual property, and they are dominant in the supply chain. So that's just a fact of life. That's how it is. So the political will is actually, how do we deal with that? And let me tell you, there are no answers. The dilemma well, I think I've said enough, actually. But I mean, these are how we need to talk about things. We need to be frank, and we need to talk about them in honest ways, and so that the corporate responses that y'all want and the public responses that you want are guided the right way. But as long as people refuse to talk about all of these things, the more difficult it's going to be to do anything about them.
And nuclear power is one of those too, because I worked on the Yucca Mountain project, and I agree with you that nuclear power is providing. Illinois has more, I think, more nuclear power plants than any other state, and so I agree with you that that's a big part of the mix. It's not generating greenhouse gases. A lot of people are getting their electricity from there. It's my opinion that we haven't dealt with the waste problem in a realistic way, and there's another potential avenue for geoscientists. But I liked your comment about how we need to talk about all of the issues, and so I think that until we get to that, and we get to people who get students to understand that there's not, that these things are all intertwined, we're not going to be able to get to really what's the word for it, long-lasting solutions.
And can I just quickly add that small and modular nuclear reactors, we're watching those very, very closely. They have the potential to leapfrog everything we're talking about today. And can I lobby for something real quick? As all of you who are actual formal educators in the audience today, as well as students, the worst thing that universities are doing in all of this is pushing out degree programs that I call science light. So my former institution before I retired, University of Texas, we have an undergraduate program in sustainability. I don't know what that is. I don't know what the students who are going to do who come out of that. They're not prepared to be able to deal with any of this stuff. So people have to be willing to do the hard work that's required in the STEM disciplines and get through them in order to really contribute. And that's another hard topic to address, because it's not easy to push young people in that direction.
Thanks, Michelle.
I want to push back on some of Michelle's comments. With regard to wind and solar power and other forms of clean energy, China is leading the world because we have ceded that to them. And one of the things I'm hoping for is that we will have a wave of investments and government policies to not only incentivize the continuation of oil and gas, but all clean energy resources, because they really can be utilized and deployed in ways that help rebuild our economies, particularly in the Midwest, but also in the Sun Belt. And so I think that I'm hoping that over the next 10 years, we will see the investments and the tax policies that incentivize the growth of these emerging industries because of the jobs that they can provide, the wealth that they can provide, and simultaneously contribute to some of our most pressing challenges, which are contributing to climate change and are adversely affecting human health of millions and millions and millions of people.
Thanks, John. I agree with you, but I also want to have a little bit of a cynical take on that, because I know that one of the reasons that the fossil fuel industry is incentivized is because of tax credits for CO2 sequestration. So the political will was there that created the incentive for the business will to respond. So I still agree with you, and I think that you're right, but that's where it has to come from. I want to, and so we've been talking about renewables and non-fossil fuel energy sources, but I want to give Bridget a chance to weigh in because of geothermal. It's another skill set that's related to what geoscientists are learning to do, pursue fossil fuel related fields. And is it renewable, or is it, what category would you put it in? And what would you say to young people who are mid-career people who are interested in looking at that as in the energy transition?
Yeah, thanks, Sherilyn, for the opportunity to comment on the geothermal. Absolutely, it's one of the big elephants in the room that's often not mentioned when people talk about renewables. I mean, everyone thinks about wind and solar as being the only options, and obviously they are a big component of that clean energy portfolio, but geothermal has a huge potential to contribute a lot more. And right now we're only contributing about 0.5% of our power generation in the US by geothermal. But looking at some of our kind of hot rock systems, we could have as much as 500 gigawatts of capacity, which is half of our grid for the whole country. And so obviously there's lots of technology challenges to overcome to get to that point, but it's a huge opportunity. And geothermal's baseload, so that can be something that can completely, offset fossil fuel-based power generation, one for one. You don't need to have any special grids, extra storage, like solar and wind. People conveniently often forget to mention the storage component, which is crucial to make those kind of a, stable energy provider. So the potential is huge. And I think something else that's also often not thought about is it's not just electricity possibilities. Geothermal can have a huge role to play in heating, and essentially low-grade heat that we spend a lot of our energy in the US is on heating buildings. And you don't need to use high-grade fuel like, gas for low-grade heat. It's kind of quite wasteful, actually, but using some, warm water would be a really good offset, right? So there's opportunities for the heating side of the equation too, which could be really a huge contributor to helping our energy mix. In terms of skill sets, there's complete comparisons and opportunities there, I think, with the skill sets used in oil and gas and fossil fuels. And, you know, right now I think there is, it is a time of some diversification. You know, there's a lot of people currently who are no longer employed in the oil and gas sector due to tough times, looking to diversify and get into geothermal as a future energy source. And you know, the skill sets there are essentially the same. You know, there's some adaptation there to the types of resource, but directly transferable. And, you know, there are several kind of oil and gas company startups who are, ones in Denver called Transitional Energy, looking at repurposing existing oil and gas wells for geothermal, for low temperature and moderate temperature geothermal, you know. And I know in Texas, they're talking about one company, I forget the company, drilling, you know, using existing wells down to 17,000 feet for geothermal in West Texas, you know. And so there's a huge opportunity there, and that conversation's happening. I think the pivot to go from oil and gas to geothermal is possible. And imagine if we had all that brain power and energy from the oil and gas sector, which is obviously huge, and devote that to, you know, trying to overcome some of these big geothermal challenges, particularly with engineered systems and manufacturing reservoirs and sustaining reservoirs. Then that could be something that we actually overcome together and make that a reality. And I guess on the very last thing you mentioned, I wanted to address the comment about, is it renewable? And I think it is, you know, and the heat comes back. The question is how it's managed, right? So I'm from New Zealand, you know, we have the second longest geothermal power plant in the world at J.E.D.I. It's been running for over 60 years now. And, you know, it's about the management of that resource to make sure that it's sustainable, and you don't prematurely draw down the reservoir. You know, if you pump it too hard for 5 years, that's not going to work. You know, we've got long ROIs on this equipment, and we want plants to run for decades, 50 years, 100 years. You know, that's the goal. And so in terms of life cycle approach, geothermal, it's great. You know, you're not having turbines that break down after a few years, and you know, solar panels that had to be replaced every 10 years. I mean, this is a long-term energy source that I think we really should be looking at more closely for offsetting our fossil fuels.
Thanks. So I and the next person I wanted to weigh in is Gretchen, because you know, so let's try to, I'd like to try to get this back to integrating the energy transition with J.E.D.I, right? So the AAPG is a lot of geoscientists, right? And historically, you know, like I experienced what Gretchen has experienced, where, you know, there's not very many of us. There's less of people like me. And so, and I'm used to being the only person in the room, the only person like me in the room, right? So we want to change that. And so I liked Reggie's comment about having people at the top and having people entering the pipeline for these professions. So the J.E.D.I part is how do we think that large organizations or professional organizations can help? Because I know a lot of them are doing things now to try to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so do you think that there's a role for professional organizations to play to get back to their membership that will actually impact what's happening in the workplace?
I think there is a role for professional organizations like AAPG and counterpart societies, SEG, Society of Petroleum Engineers. I think there's a role, and many of them are doing similar things in member engagement and you know, facilitating leadership training, giving opportunities to present, to publish, to network, to collaborate. There's a lot of things that are going on that are similar between these organizations. Within AAPG, I would say that there's been a great burst of activity in the AAPG Women's Network, which is planning all kinds of activities and studying some really important things relevant to J.E.D.I, such as the diversity and inclusiveness of our honors and awards and our leadership nominations. I think they are actually working towards a publication on that, which would be great to just kind of get the record set straight. We are working to try to include some anti-bias training in AAPG activities. You know, we've had grants that support students for a long time, and I'm a proud supporter of the Isaac Crumbly grant because that has been really important to helping minority students beginning their geoscience careers. I think there are some real challenges. You know, on geology has a fairly negative reputation, and I think one of the things that I've always liked the fieldwork aspect of geology, and you know, a lot of us have simply been unaware of how difficult fieldwork can be if you're not a white guy in the United States. And so reading recently some insights published by Hendrada Ali and Chris Jackson and others, you realize that doing field work, which I think is so important to professional development, especially for people working in the subsurface, that there are so many extra steps and precautions that have to be taken to make that possible. You know, I would like to see AAPG play a stronger role in that. I think, you know, accommodation of people dealing with different abilities, we need to do a better job. I think organizations like AGU have been pretty upfront about what they're doing. So I think providing better support is necessary. Now the real challenge is organizations like AAPG. Many of them make the bulk of their revenue through conferences, and of course we're not doing that during a pandemic. So so that's been a real hit. And then the fact that the oil business has also been hit so hard has affected engagement of sponsors. And so although I think we have a lot of great ideas about initiatives that we can take, there's the financial reality that hits us in the face. So, you know, I am optimistic that we can continue to do things because we have some wonderful volunteers who are really engaged and doing hard work. You know, I wish there was the comment about buying a lottery ticket, and I wish we could buy a winning lottery ticket for the professional and scientific societies to get them through these next couple of years that are going to be really tough. So I'll stop there, but thank you for the question, Sherilyn.
Yeah, you're welcome. Reg, do you want to weigh in on that? Reggie? Oh.
Thanks. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Well, I think Gretchen has kind of hit it on the head. I'm reminded of a video I saw of a former AAPG president not very long ago, a guy from Midland, Texas, you know, who talked about, you know, how unsafe and how difficult it would be for a woman to go sit on a well in West Texas. I mean, it was just really, you know, atrocious. So there is this transition I think we're having to go through to educate folks. And one of the good things that's happened at AAPG is that I think AAPG, look, it's the first time AAPG has been really run by an executive team that consists mainly of women. And I think those types of role models really have a big impact on diversity. One of those women is an African-American. So I think it really kind of comes back to, you can encourage people to come in at the bottom, but unless you're making changes at the top, you don't have the ability to sustain anything. I want to come back to the little brief discussion between John and what John was really talking about technology. It was really between John and Michelle. Look, the oil and gas industry today, I completely agree with Michelle that it's not going away. However, we as an industry have to be able to share and educate the non-believers in that it's not going away, but we're going to do it better. We're going to do it cheaper. We're going to be more cost effective, and it's going to be better. I can remember my time at the US government when the price of oil in California was like $9 a barrel. And government stepped in, allowed North Slope crude to be sent to Japan, and the price of crude in the next day went up $1.50. Okay, today, California crudes trade at Brent prices. It's very expensive, and the reason why it is that there is this mentality that we can do it all in 5 years with electric vehicles, and we can make this transition real quick. I agree with Michelle, it's not going to happen, but there's a way we have to articulate that. And to John's point, it really is going to be done with technology. It's already been done in the refining industry. The machine learning, the artificial intelligence, that's already been done in the refining industry and the retail business. A lot of businesses, it has yet really to come to our area. So I think there's great hope for bringing those two fields together, Cheryl, and the geostatisticians and the AI people. I think there's real hope to do that. And James Pippin, you've got a great opportunity to bring those two things together. And ultimately, if you don't do it, then you end up being Kodak, trying to sell Polaroid cameras. You end up being the coal industry that just simply could never understand with 500 years of natural resources that you're going to go away. But at the end of the day, if it's cheaper and it's cleaner, you can become dead really quickly.
Thanks, Reg. So we've just got couple of minutes left, like 2 minutes. And I hope you don't mind that I use that as your final statement. And then I want to go through all of the panelists and give everybody about 20 seconds to just give some final thoughts so that we can close it out. But I want to start with Gretchen because she had something specifically she wanted to respond to. So Gretchen, 20 seconds.
Yeah, so after that unfortunate podcast, the Women's Network began a series of profiles online under the hashtag female geologists. And I see these and I'm inspired every day. I want to just also add that I think that one of the big takeaways for me in thinking and preparing for this panel is that developing the J.E.D.I workforce is not a political issue that scientific or professional organizations should cast aside because we focus on science. I think it is a matter of professional responsibility and ethics. And so I'm really pleased to have been a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. So now I'm going to go back to the original order. Michelle, what are your closing thoughts?
I wish y'all luck.
Thank you. Bridget.
Yeah, I think it's just been a really interesting discussion, and I think I agree with Gretchen. This is not something that's political. This is just essential as human beings that we act in an ethical and inclusive manner. And I think something that's key is thinking about the whole pipeline. We have leaky pipelines in lots of different ways, but I think starting really early with engaging people of color and other minorities and women starting early and get them on that path and then support them through that path as they progress in the career. It's not like a knee-jerk one fix later on at university level. It's too late. By then they've already kind of got their paths, in mind. So I think starting early and consistently, being inclusive and diverse from early schooling onwards. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. James, closing thoughts.
Just like what Gretchen was saying about making sure that people like Isaac have funding for programs and just keeping the education starting about energy and then what's possible with energy, like where you can go with it and the capabilities of the multidisciplinary sciences that are utilized within energy are some of the main things that need to be incorporated into, sorry, my dog's at the door. But there's a lot of aspects that are utilized in science that will ultimately benefit those in energy. So
thanks, James. Sterling?
I'll say it was a great conversation. One of the things I would say is when you look around the country, I think we don't, and I'm just speaking in general terms, the US don't invest in their people like we should. If I relate it to resources, there's a lot of untapped resources that go unused and people don't reach their full potential. So I think I agree with everyone. J.E.D.I is something that we have to do. I don't think it's something that's optional. So it starts from at the top as well as the bottom, and it has to be long-term. I work for companies that start out down that approach with a J.E.D.I workforce and then they step away from it. I've been in government and they've done the same thing, and there's no consistency. I mean, we have to do I'll think about the 60s when it was the race to the moon. They invested all their resources in NASA to get man to the moon, and a whole lot of technologies and scientists came out as a result of that. I think this is the effort that we have to do. It has to be a long-term, short-term, full court press.
Thank you, Sterling.
Thank you all.
Tamika?
Just hopefully my career path that I described earlier highlights, what's needed to make a successful Black female in petroleum industry that survived 3 layoffs, significant layoffs that's corresponded to the crashes of hydrocarbons. And I will say that geosciences don't change the principles of it, the applications do, and how you make that successful is bringing that into the academia and supporting organizations like CDEP and schools that support, like in New Mexico, that support the diversity of their students, giving them the technologies and the research projects that can actually equip them to be better geoscientists is key. So
great.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks, Tamika. John?
Great conversation. I enjoyed being part of it. If we would commit ourselves to making inclusiveness, justice, and equality of opportunity for all as our guidepost, we all win.
Absolutely. Then our last panel, Stephen Wells, closing thoughts?
Well, Sherilyn, thank you. I think for us to be successful in everything we do, from K through 12 through college and beyond, we have to change this nation. We have to build this culture of dignity, respect from the very beginning. And, I'm very optimistic, but we've lost our way a little bit. But if we invest in this generation, I think we can get back on track. So to me, what we're trying to do here transcends everything. It has to start from the very beginning of life. And we've got to think about that. We're going to be successful in the long term. So thank you very much for being part of the panel.
Thank you. And I just want to say one thing, and it is I hope we don't run out of steam. I think this is what we're doing. It's great. There's a lot of energy being put into it right now. I hope it continues, because that's the only way we're going to continue to go forward. And so I'm going to step back and let Jim close the meeting out.
Thank you, Sherilyn, and thank you all the panelists. Again, we'll do a little virtual recognition and applause. Again, thank you so much, and you really added to the today's discussion, all of you. Thank you. Before we let you all jump off, though, and I saw David Spears had his hand up, and I would be a little remiss if I didn't allow a committee member, if he wanted to make some comments or had something to raise with the panel. David, do you still want to raise anything?
Yeah, sure. And I just had a question for James, if James is still here. As the one minority student representative we have on the panel, I was just wondering if he could comment on what was the one single greatest factor that caused him to want to take up a career in the geosciences.
So that's actually something I meant to talk about whenever I was first talking in the flash talk. So whenever I went into CDEP, I was kind of iffy on going into energy in general. But whenever I was back in high school in my chemistry class, the one aspect that really caught me off was that, so whenever my family would go to the lake, every single time that we would go to drop the boat in the water, you can like literally look off to the right and you would just see a power station. That power station now does not exist there because it was a coal one. That coal, they would use the water from the lake itself to generate steam. But at the time, I didn't really have an understanding of that. Whenever we would go there in the summer, I was like, oh, look, a really old factory. But after time, that factory went away. And it was because that source of coal was no longer seen as sustainable. And so I was like, well, new stuff had to arise for that whole factory basically to go away. And it's that idea that whenever I went into CDEP, that they kind of shed a light on that there is innovation, and it's like the new people who are rising up, like it's us that has to do that change. And that's kind of like what sparked my interest into energy entirely, really. Was a combination of a lot of small but very powerful things. And those types of things that like I feel people miss out on whenever they just go on their day-to-day life. But it's if you look closely, those are the things. Like people don't think like, oh look, I'm just going to turn a light switch. Well, where'd that light power come from? I don't know. That's the things that people don't always grasp. So
okay, thank you, James. One other, I don't intend to use all of our time. I have a 2-minute closing, but I just wanted to give, we have one other committee member that has some really great insights. I don't know if we'll be able to unmute, but John Leftwitz, I would be remiss if I didn't allow you to have a couple minutes to make any comments on this meeting, if you wish.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
You're good. Would you like to add anything, John?
Yeah, well, I think I've had a very interesting experience today in the fact that I thought this was an excellent meeting. I think you all added something very interesting to the piece. And I'm very, very proud and very happy that you people worked on this, and I'm proud of you. My thing that I found quite interesting is that there's still different perspectives on how to solve the energy problems. And I think, I've always been kind of leaning toward atomic energy and all these things have their place. I think this is going to be a very interesting thing for us to pursue in the future. But I'm very impressed with you, and I'd like to leave with you my highest regards. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I just a couple real quick wrap up here. You know, when we as a committee looked at combining energy transition, workforce, and J.E.D.I, I think we struggled a bit on how to organize it, but I think I'll speak for the committee that these themes all wove together very well today. And I think one, you can see the overall pieces, but individually, I think they've made tremendous sense. I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a minute and just suggest very briefly on this energy transition part that clearly we're looking at an incredibly complex change at scale. And it's going to be a huge challenge to accomplish that while minimizing unwanted and unintended consequences. We see that with whether it's some of the power outages in California earlier this year or other types of issues. And those of us that work a little bit on energy disruption challenges see some of the potential issues out there. So I would suggest, and we talked a lot about how oil and gas has a huge, an important place in this. And maybe one way to encourage some of the new generations is thinking about how we talk about the energy transition and talk about the different energy sources, different energy uses. And instead of thinking about good or bad, we frame them up in trade-offs, because everything has a trade-off. And you know, one of my favorite examples is that you know, moving from horses to internal combustion engines did create some of the air quality issues that we had for years, but it also eliminated a huge solid waste problem. So no matter what you do, there's always, no matter how we move forward, there are trade-offs. So encourage us as a community to think in those terms rather than characterizing things as better or not as good or things like that. So as far as today, I think we in the conversation, we identified that whatever this energy transition and future energy portfolio, it will be mixed. We don't know what it is. It will require flexibility and ingenuity and new technology. I think on the workforce issue, we know we have our work cut out for us. There were many different comments about whether it's encouraging just the STEM fields and the need to develop workforce generally. And then we talked a great deal about the J.E.D.I component and key element. We identified some key elements to successful programs to ensuring the J.E.D.I capable and skilled students. And those include some hands-on internship opportunities, ensuring inclusivity, entrepreneurialism, technology and innovation, outreach, recognition of environmental and social justice themes, and the importance of universities, colleges, and employers all working together across sectors, because they all have a responsibility to build this future energy workforce. And one of the things that that the committee is excited, and I think I'm excited to be part of, or I am excited to be part of, is working through the national academies and this committee. And we'll continue with these discussions. In fact, we have a working meeting tomorrow with the committee to develop these themes further and see how can we carry this conversation forward. In addition, just a little bit of marketing for the committee itself. We're looking at what are our spring topic and our autumn topic. We do 2 meetings a year, and we will continue with these energy transition themes. One that's very high on our list, not sure exactly where it's going to fit in, is the issue of critical materials. And I know many people that are engaged in this community will want to tune into that discussion as well. So with that, again, thank you for all of our panelists, for Sherilyn for moderating, for Elizabeth and her staff at the National Academies for all the coordination and logistics, and especially thank you to the attendees that stayed with us the whole time and added to the conversation. Thank you very much. Wish you a wonderful holiday season, and so thanks again, and have a great afternoon.